Good evening, Patriots, and welcome to the third episode of the Pledge of Loyalty. I am obviously your host, Nick Parisi. And before we start off today's episode and talk about the issues plaguing America this week, I first want to repeat what I said yesterday on my Instagram video. I apologize for not posting yesterday. I had a lot of work. Normally, typically I post on Wednesdays. It's easier, but I decided to leave you guys with a short video explaining the shutdown and leaving the rest for today. So without further ado, let's get started with today's episode of the Pledge of Loyalty. So as we know, this week, most specifically yesterday at midnight, the United States government has officially entered a shutdown. Now, what is a government shutdown, you may ask? This all ties back to the appropriations process of the United States Congress. Appropriations process is basically the process that's debated and decided by both chambers of Congress in order to fund the government, to approve a budget for the government. So here's what happens. The House typically proposes a bill to fund the government agencies, every single one of them, and if they pass it, that goes to the Senate. And the Senate has something called a filibuster, which most of you probably have heard about it and understand it. But to the ones who don't know what the filibuster is, it is a tool that has existed in the United States Senate for over 150 years, which basically makes it so in order to end debate on a bill and allow for a motion to place a bill on the final passage or vote on it for the last time, in order to really get there, you need to end debate. And a minimum of 60 votes in favor of ending debate is required for that to happen. When that does not happen, debate is extended forever and the bill is eventually tabled and dies. That is the very root of the problem with the shutdowns. So what happens when the government does not pass an appropriations funding bill in the time required for that to happen? The government is not able to guarantee new funding for their agencies. So salaries for most agency employees are cut down, federal workers. Agencies have no more money, so a lot of their projects have to stop ASAP as soon as they run out of money. Basically, the government enters into disarray, and Congress cannot pass anything until they are able to pass that appropriations bill. So we enter into a deadlock, and that's what happens. So how is that related to what's happening this week? So it all started all the way back in the House of Representatives. As we know, Republicans and Democrats are rivals. And they were arguing on how to run government. Something they've done since, 200 years? Maybe more than that. So basically what happened is, the Republicans, in order to further compromise with the Democrats throughout a greater period of time, they proposed a temporary funding bill which extends from now to March of 2026 in order to keep the government funded as they negotiate and compromise, right? So the House Republicans, led by Speaker Mike Johnson, they passed a very clean bill. It was very, very good faith. It included funding for all the agencies, and it really stayed in the boundaries of appropriations. There was no politicizing of the bill. There was no new political actions to be taken, even though they could have done it. As Speaker Mike Johnson said, the Republicans could have added a lot of partisan things, but they chose not to in order to further negotiate in good faith with the Democrats. However, as soon as the bill reached the United States Senate floor, the Democrats proposed their own counter offer of the appropriations bill. And that is where the problem starts. Because the counter offer of the Democrats for appropriation was, pardon my French, a bunch of bullshit. Okay? That's just simply the best way to define it. The bill was terrible. It was expensive. It was politicized. It did not fix anything. And worse, it funded healthcare, taxpayer-funded healthcare to illegal immigrants. Now, of course, as we have been seeing in the news, the mainstream media recently, the Democrats completely denying accountability for anything they're doing, completely denying accountability for wanting to fund illegal immigrant healthcare with your tax money. it is very important that before we enter the in-depth of the shutdown, we really expose the lies of the Democrats. Of course, I really wouldn't expect Democrats to know facts, considering their entire party is based on the extremely anti-scientific idea that a man can become a woman, not being able to define what a woman is, and then later blaming their opponents as anti-science. It is a party completely rooted on racism and the idea that people of color cannot achieve prosperity without government help, and then labeling their opponents as racists. It is rooted in the idea that censorship is good if it's against their opponents, but it is horrible and unconstitutional when it is against them. But of course, not really dodging the topic. We're just really setting a basis for who we're up against. So the Democrats argue that the entire claim that they are funding the taxpayer-funded health care for illegal immigrants is a lie and a Republican talking point. On what grounds? On the grounds that they are masters at picking one major policy that they support, campaign the hell out of it, and basically cause every single person looking at them to ignore the other, thousands of policies that they support, which does the same thing they're saying it doesn't. And that policy is the Affordable Care Act subsidies, which basically means that the government subsidizes people when they get Medicaid, so they are able to pay their insurance for hospitals, for medical care. Now, legally speaking, it is true that illegal immigrants are not eligible for ACA subsidies and for Medicaid in general. The regular program of Medicaid, they're not eligible. That is true. That is in the law. However, the idea that Democrats are not trying to give illegal immigrants taxpayer-funded health care is nonsense, because they are completely dodging away from the fact that from one part of the bill that legally speaking cannot do that, 5 of them at least can. And they don't want to talk about that. So let's get into that. Why do the Democrats want to fund illegal immigrant health care? That's very easy, because it gives them votes. The more illegal people come here and vote for them, the more power they get. And not even just voting, the more population, because it was proven when in 2021 we ran an investigation of the census and we found that it was rigged. It proved that it didn't matter the immigration status of the residents, they still counted towards the population, meaning that it easily not only influenced the electoral count for Democratic states such as Illinois, California, and New York, it also influenced the districts. The districts with the biggest illegals, they were basically Democrat gerrymanders. If you guys know what that is, it's basically it's basically a district purposefully drawn for the sake of favoring one party or another. But that's beside the point. That's kind of off topic. So back to the idea that the Democrats are funding healthcare for illegal immigrants through taxpayer funds. The first point, there is a program called Emergency Medicaid, which has around at least $5 billion of the Medicaid budget. It's around 1% of the Medicaid budget, so around $8 billion. That program grants funding regardless of immigration status. And in the One Big Beautiful Bill, President Trump did add a clause restricting certain sets of immigrants from that program. And the biggest part of them all was a specification not allowing illegal immigrants to get funding from that program. Now, of course, the Democrats, in their funding bill, you can look at speaker.gov. Speaker Mike Johnson did post facts basically exposing the Democrat funding bill. In their own bill, they are trying to remove the clause of the One Big Beautiful Bill that does not allow emergency Medicaid to be given to illegal immigrants. So that is lie number one. Lie number two, this all ties back to the Biden administration. Although illegal immigrants are not allowed and are not eligible for Medicaid and for Medicare or whatever, asylum seekers, asylum grants, refugees, and most importantly, after the Biden administration, parolees were absolutely entitled to receive this Medicaid and Medicare grants, Medicare funding, whatever you name it. During the Biden administration, over 100,000 asylum claims were given to people, and many of them came here illegally. And not only that, the Biden administration, aside from giving over 100,000 asylum grants, also granted parolee status for at least a year to many illegals who were already here. It was their version of a pathway to citizenship program. And what did that do? When the Biden administration gave this parolee status to these illegals, they automatically became eligible, yes, to receive Medicaid funding. That was outlawed by the One Big Beautiful Bill, which the Democrat funding bill now, you can look again, speaker.gov, are trying to repeal. It is one of their biggest priorities to repeal that sector of the bill. So that's line number 2. Line number 3, they completely are avoiding the fact that there is a loophole called the state loophole. So basically, a portion of Medicaid and the entire health programs created by the United States Congress, part of that goes directly to the states to fund their own Medicaid and Medicare programs. One of them, of course, gives money in terms of compensation to Medi-Cal, there we go. Medi-Cal is the state version of Medicaid in California. There are also other state-run Medicaid programs in New York and in Illinois, which Medicaid, which the federal government does release compensations to. And the issue is, you can look at the policies of each of these three states. They blatantly accepted the fact, they blatantly admitted that they do give billions of dollars worth of taxpayer money to illegal immigrant health care. Now, that is a loophole, which the Trump administration, under the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, repealed. They punished all of these states which were proven and admitted to giving taxpayer money in order to fund illegal immigrant health care. This is part of the bill which the Democrats want, once again, to repeal. Now, we have been in this for like around 13 minutes. We have already debunked the entire Democratic talking point in 3 arguments. It gets worse and worse. There are many provisions also in Obamacare and by actions taken during the Biden administration, other than that, which does allow, as not even only mentioning waste, fraud, and abuse, which, by the way, a recent CBO, Congressional Budget Office, study showed that from now to around 2034, because of the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, around 2.1 ineligible recipients of Medicaid will be kicked out of the program. So this idea that the Democrats tried to propose when Trump first got elected, that fraud, waste, and abuse was somehow a conspiracy theory by the MAGA Republicans, that this idea that it did not exist and it was just an excuse for Republicans to cut healthcare for everybody, is simply not true. Because the own Congressional Budget Office, which favors Democrats a lot of the time, admitted that at least 2 million of people who are receiving it right now are not eligible. And a lot of them, yes, are illegal immigrants, as proven by the Department of Health and Human Services. So cut that crap and get back to work, the Democratic Party. You guys are the ones to blame for this. So not even that. We have already talked about healthcare in terms of illegal immigrant funding. Let's talk about something else, because the Democrats are completely dodging the fact that they want not only funding for illegal immigrants, they want to give government-sponsored healthcare to people who are able to work, however don't want to, purely out of laziness. Because guess what? One of the key provisions of the healthcare section of the One Big Beautiful Bill created a work requirement of 40 hours a week, which is a typical full-time job requirement for able-bodied people to be eligible for Medicaid recipients, to be able to be covered by Medicaid. The Democrats released the most nasty and lying campaign against the Republican Party in June and in July during the campaign for the One Big Beautiful Bill, accusing Republicans of cutting health care for the American people, ending the coverage of millions of people. They're all going to suffer. Excuse me, if you are able to work, if you're able to work 40 hours a week, but you're not, you should not be getting health care from the government. That is simply, very plainly put, parasitism. You cannot reap the benefits of civilization without adding anything to it. That is basic morality, that is common sense, and it is not going to fly in the land of opportunity. Because of the words of Frank Underwood from House of Cards, America was founded on the spirit of industry. You build your future. It isn't handed to you. Now, the problem with the Democrats is that they have this idea of everybody needs to be covered and breastfed by the state while not having any duties to produce to civilization. That is absolutely false. And that is exactly what they've proven they want by wanting to remove one of the best provisions, in my opinion, of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which requires that. So I fail to understand what the argument for that is exactly. They're accusing us of wanting to cut healthcare for the American people. They're accusing us of wanting to destroy the healthcare system. They've already done that to heaven and back. Okay? They've already done that. Since the passage of Obamacare in 2009, or correct me if I'm wrong, premium prices in insurance have more than doubled. In just the Obama years, they have more than doubled. Millions of people who previously had a premium coverage have lost it because it became too expensive. Why? Because Obama, not satisfied with completely bankrupting our country by creating an unsustainable, expensive, and ineffective public healthcare system, required people to pay for it through the individual mandate, which was one of the most disgusting parts of Obamacare, which thank God for President Trump abolishing, which basically forced everybody to buy mandatory coverage so they could pay for people. That was a disaster. Even in 2016, Hillary Clinton, on the second debate stage, had to admit it was not working the way they wanted it to work. It was a disgrace. And what do the Democrats want? They want that to happen again. They want to undo all the progress Republicans have made in less than a year in order to keep the status quo of more debt, more deficit, more inflation, and the working class struggling. Are you kidding me? Who are you to do that to us? Who the hell are you to violate our country? And this slogan, which by the way did not come for free, do not tread on me. And the Democrats are treading on us right now. They are supporting the shutdown of a government. They are supporting that you, federal worker, get your salary taken away. They're supporting that you, recipient of federal funding, have no more money because of agency funding closures. Why? So they can fund people who should not even be here in this country? So they can fund people who don't want to work? So they can bankrupt this country even further, yet add no benefits to our economy? Give me a break. Who do these people think they are? We are not in the Soviet Union. We are not in Cuba. We're not in Venezuela. We are in the United States of America. These people have to have the common decency to respect you, me, and everybody at home watching this, but they don't. Why? Because all they care for is power, as I have highlighted time and time again in this episode in my Instagram and throughout my entire life as a political activist. Now, another thing the Democrats want is propaganda, which does not really come as a surprise, considering their entire regime for the past 4 years before Trump was based on propaganda, censorship, and lying. And how do they do that? through public radio, through public broadcasting, PBS and NPR, which are two major left-wing talking point organizations funded before Trump abolishes the One Big Beautiful Bill by taxpayer funds. They were doing that. And now what do they want? They want to return funding towards NPR and PBS. Never mind the fact that over 87% of NPR journalists were registered Democrats, and absolutely zero were Republicans. They want you to fund it. That is media manipulation at its best. That is government outreach at its best. That is fiscal irresponsibility at its best. Not only do they want to prioritize illegals over Americans, slackers over hard workers, they also want to manipulate you. They want to gaslight you so you never complain about them again. That is the Democratic Party of today's age in a nutshell. And these people still want to call themselves Democratic. Give me a break. So anyways, moving on from the government shutdown, there are quite a few things that have been happening recently. And one of them, once again, is political violence. Recently, and I want to take a moment to applaud President Trump for this, we have officially labeled Antifa as a terrorist organization. Now, obviously, the Democrats are denying accountability for it. Why? Because Antifa is not an organization. It's an idea. It is not an idea. It is absolutely an organization. Oh, but it's not centralized. Whatever. You can have several nuclei and still be an organization. Just because something is decentralized does not mean it is not its independent organization. Us, under the Articles of Confederacy, we were technically decentralized. We did not have a strong and powerful federal government, yet we were still an organization called the United States of America. So that argument doesn't make sense, number one. Number two, they're not organized. Go to an Antifa protest. You're going to see everybody with well-funded armor, well-funded uniforms, weapons, a central ideology. How the hell is that not organization? How? And President Trump has been saying he would do that since 2020. He finally did it. Why? Because the Democrats have finally gone off the deep end this year by not even this year. That all started back in 2015. They have been constantly labeling us in the most dehumanizing labels ever in the history of humanity. Fascist, Nazi, threat to democracy, threat to our republic, conspiracy theorist, science denier, you name it, whatever the hell you want to say. One question: how long does this have to go until people start dying, until blood starts being spilled? And the assassination of Charlie Kirk and other attacks on Republicans has shown that. It has shown that we have reached a time where political rhetoric is not only just flat-out speech, it is now also actions, which was proven by many horrible actions in less than 1 month. A shooting in a church, a shooting in another church, the killing of Charlie Kirk, many horrible actions, and a shooting in an ICE facility, which just prove how crazy and out of touch the Democratic Party really is. But of course, we're going to pull their bullshit study by the ADL, which is a very stupid organization, which, thank God, the federal government and the FBI for officially severing ties with them for their lack of common sense and their overall predominant, completely false rhetoric. We have cut ties with them. They released a study a while ago that said that around 70% of all political extremist attacks are done by right-wingers. First of all, that's false. Because here's the problem. Not only did they not consider the over 32 deaths in the 2020 riots, which were created by BLM, by the way, they did not consider that as left-wing extremism. Over 80%, there's more than that, of all of the right-wing extremist deaths under that study were basically deaths that had nothing to do with right-wing extremism at all, Some of them were arson because of a custodial battle. Other than were shootings because of a drug deal. Because the guy just happened to have a swastika tattooed around his arm. That is bad faith argument at its finest. By that logic, we can consider that most of the violent crime in this country is done by far-left Democrats. Why? Because 50% of the population who commits murders is black, and over 80% of black voters are Democrats. So by the ADL's logic, that fits. But we are better than that. We actually know how to use common sense and logic. So we're not going to appeal to that extreme nonsense. And if we look at the regular statistics, left-wing terrorism has been growing exponentially much higher than right-wing terrorism. Why? And that's if we count the neo-Nazi organizations that actually hate us, the old right, the traditionalists, you name it, they actually hate us. They're their own people, yet they're considered far right. I don't know why. Even if we count that left-wing extremism has been growing exponentially higher than right-wing terrorism. So they really have nowhere to run on that rhetoric. So why do they keep on it? Because, obviously, the left wouldn't be the left if they did not deny accountability. That has been the Marxist playbook since the writing of the Communist Manifesto, by the way. It has been the playbook since the beginning of the Soviet Union. As Lenin said, accuse your opponents of what you do. Their entire playbook is centered around denying accountability. And that is not really a surprise to anybody. What did Stalin do when over 5 million people were murdered through the biggest genocide in the Ukrainian history called the Holodomor? What did he do? He shifted the blame away from him and his policies of the 5-year plans, correct, and the collectivization of agriculture towards the weather, not considering the fact that Germany in that same year span had a much worse weather crisis, yet did not see nearly as much of the effects of the Ukrainian famine during the Holodomor. That was a lie. What did Mao Zedong do in order to prevent people from knowing that his policies in the Great Leap Forward killed over 50 million Chinese out of starvation and persecution and murder? He blamed everybody who unleashed those data, who publicized those data as rightists in order for them to be executed. So it is pretty common in the left wing, not only of modern day, but also general, to deny accountability for their actions. Which is where we reach the modern day problem. How do we debate, how do we dialogue with people who not only don't take any accountability for what they do, but also accuse you of what they do? That is actually the hardest question I've ever had to answer. Out of all questions I have to research and answer on a daily basis, economics, taxes, abortion, gun rights, immigration, LGBTQ, the hardest question I have ever been presented with is, how do we dialogue with people who want us dead? How do we get to a consensus with people who not only do not take accountability for when they're wrong, but also blame you for everything that's wrong in the world? How do we deal with these people? We're Christians, so we got to show grace. But we also got to remind them that grace does not mean weakness. We have to show them that, yes, we are peaceful, we love them, yet we will never compromise on the truth. And how do we do that? We go out there and fight. We campaign. We speak. We don't allow them to fearmonger us. We don't allow them to make us back down. We do not allow them to intimidate us. Which is why I say to you today, you who goes to college, who goes to high school, start a Turning Point USA chapter at every school if your school doesn't have one. If it does, join it. Become a frequent member. Campaign for it. The future of this country depends on you, because you are not the future of this country. You are the present of this country. And the actions you take today will be detrimental to our future as a nation. We are not going to be alive forever. So make sure to fight for a country where in the future you can tell your children why they are able to grow up in a good home, with later able to get a good job, later able to have their own families. Make sure to be the one telling your children how we did that, and not ever how we could have done it, but we're too cowardly to fight back against the left. Here's what I say to you. We, as Christians, need to be more like Jesus and less like Pontius Pilate. And this is a criticism I have of a lot of libertarians out there. Although I love all of you, I have a big criticism of a lot of libertarians nowadays, because they will play the Pontius Pilate role instead of the Jesus role. And what that is, allow unfairness to take place in society, allow injustice to take its root in our country, and allow people to be persecuted, and then wash their hands. This isn't my fault. Could I have voted against them? Absolutely. Could I have fought against them? Absolutely. But I don't believe in the government, so I didn't vote, so I'm washing my hands clean of everything I did wrong. That doesn't work. If you don't vote against people who are oppressing you, you are directly voting for them to oppress you. I am sorry, but that is philosophy 101. If you do not vote against evil, you are endorsing it. If you are on the fence between Satan and Jesus, you are with Satan, because guess what? He owns the fence. So my last appeal to you guys tonight, in conclusion, never stop fighting for what you believe in. Never let yourself be manipulated and brainwashed by an evil and sinister media, which has been doing this since President Trump came down the escalator in 2015. All of you are intelligent, all of you are capable, and all of you are equal under the eyes of the Lord and in this country, for we all bleed the red blood of patriots. Never allow them to take that away from you. Never allow them to tell you any differently, because guess what? It is not true. We are all united under one God in one country. In that order. So, youth, create your families. Create a stable household. Get a decently paying job to sustain yourself. Don't become dependent on the government or anybody else. Because the moment you become financially dependent after you are able to get a job is the moment you have reached sort of indentured servitude in a way. Although slavery does not exist, people today have a very big problem sustaining themselves. And I would rather be poor and have a job than be a slave to my own actions. So please, in my last appeal to you guys, I beg you, do not let this week go to waste. Do not let the gifts God gave you go to waste. Do not let the skills you possess to make America great and fair again go to waste. Go out there, go to church, approach yourself to the divine, because all truth is God's truth. All that is right belongs to God. All that is good belongs to God. And those who worship Him will be recognized by Jesus in heaven. So go to church. Reach moral high grounds in politics. Always fight for the truth. Never compromise it on it. Again, I cannot emphasize how important that is. But most importantly, even though the world would try to shut you down for spreading the truth, never, ever, ever back down. Because remember, your kingdom is not of this world. Your kingdom is the kingdom of God. And in the kingdom of God, all truth belongs to Him. All that is graceful and just belongs to Him. And the battle we're fighting is not against each other. It is against evil. So thank you for watching. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.